All right, Ryan, what is the newest cEDH commander that you would recommend to new players?
Oh, please God, not Slicer. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Playing with Power podcast, the podcast where we talk about all things cEDH, EDH, and Magic the Gathering. I am your host, Ryan.
And I am your host, Callahan, and today we are going to be talking about decks for new players in 2023. This is an update of one of our very first Playing with Power podcast episodes, and is something we'll be sure to do at least once a year. Turns out there's a lot of legendary creatures that they release these days. But first, we're going to pay the bills. Tickets for our latest Mox Masters tournament are on sale now. Compete for $2,000 in prizes and points towards our Invitational, coming this October in Columbus, Ohio. Tickets sell out for each event, so pick up yours today at moxmasters.events. Our merchandise is available in our store. We have dice, coins, playmats, tokens, sleeves, and more, all available. Go to playingwithpowermtg.com and help support the channel. You can also help support us on Patreon. Patrons get access to our Discord, webcam leagues, playdays, early access to videos, names and the credits of our show, exclusive videos, merchandise, and the ability to be on an episode. There are tiers for everyone, so go to patreon.com/playingwithpowermtg to help support our show. Also, if you're looking to sponsor the podcast, you can find Ryan's email in the podcast notes or the YouTube video description.
And speaking of Patreon, we do a shout out for one lucky Patreon every single episode. And today's Patreon shout out goes to Dizzy MTG. Thank you, Dizzy.
Thanks a lot, Dizzy. We appreciate you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into our topic, which is the decks we recommend for new players in 2023. So basically, there's a couple of different things that we observe as we're entrenched cEDH players, as well as some criteria that we kind of think about when we're when somebody asks us, hey, I'm new, what should I start with? And there's a couple of things we've learned over the years saying you should probably stay away from these, or you should probably maybe, move a little bit more towards those for different reasons that we'll kind of just, talk about over today's episode. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about first is those trends. What are some trends that we're seeing, over the last 12 months, maybe 24 months or whenever it is that we're, will sometimes influence these decisions and are just kind of good to know. So Callahan, I'll let you kick it off. What are some trends that we've been seeing over the last, rolling 12 months?
Yeah, it is kind of interesting to me, Ryan, because a lot of people, I think, historically have thought of cEDH as actually a fairly static format where not a lot changes. Obviously, there's been some really big upheavals over the history of the format, the printing of the partner commanders in Commander 2016. Obviously, Theros Beyond Death, very shortly after the banning of Flash, really threw the format on its head. Shortly thereafter, the banning of Flash, both really threw the format on its head. But since then, besides the random one-off printing of Dockside, right, in C19 or something like that as well, there hasn't been, I think, as many years as impactful on cEDH as the last year. It does kind of feel weird to do this the best new decks a year or a little over a year since we last did this, but a lot of stuff has changed in the last year. More and more brewers are kind of trying out new things. They're printing more and more powerful legendary creatures. And the style of decks that people are changing are kind of the style of decks that people are playing are kind of changing as some of the philosophy around what we're looking for in our cEDH decks have changed. I think this has partially been motivated by the growth of the cEDH tournament scene, thanks to Eminence Gaming and Monarch and even our own Mox Master series and whatnot. We've had more and more tournaments that help us kind of find out what's best, which at the end of the day, we care about at cEDH at some level, and at some level we don't. But I think this is the main contributing factor to these kind of trends that we're seeing. Number one, there was a very popular trend in cEDH deck building for a long time that a lot of people called layered combos. A lot of the cards that you played were cards that had incidental value, that were good cards, quote unquote, but they also could be part of a 3-card combo that would win you the game, or generate you so much value that you practically won the game. And as time has gone on, especially over the last year, more and more people have said, why am I playing this so card that could be part of a potential 3-card combo when I could just play a better card in that slot? Which has led to more and more proactive deck building as opposed to kind of like maybe one could say mid-range deck building or reactive deck building. People have been more and more concerned with putting like an ask on the stack rather than trying to answer other people's asks at any one point in time. So you've seen the format get like maybe faster, maybe proactive, and as a result of this, like layered combos, as they were so often called, are kind of falling out of favor. I think that's the first big trend.
Yeah, the example I always think about is Elsha. If you give a new player Elsha, or a new player enters the format and they take Elsha of the Infinite, and you'll be like, all right, cool, here's the deck, and you ask them a question, how do you win with this deck? And they'll be like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. And you're like, oh, didn't you know you're actually supposed to cast a bunch of spells, build up her prowess, rolling Earthquake everyone for 40. But if it's less than enough, then you Swords to Plowshares your own Elsha, and you do all this nonsense to try. And it's like, that's so hard to discern and understand. But it's like, but I didn't want to run a dead card in Elsha. That was just a super easy win condition. That is just. Yeah, and so fewer people picked up Elsha. Layered combos fall out of favor because there's not as many pilots on it, not as many brewers on it, not as much opportunities for exploration on it. And people just didn't want to do that. They didn't want to disseminate a Hulk line when they're just trying to get into the format. They didn't want to disseminate a win conless deck, is what they used to call it. Win conless. It didn't have a win con. You just had all good cards. But like you said, it actually wasn't all good cards. It was just all
medium cards that happen to have text on them besides you win the game explicitly.
Yeah, so it was this big convoluted soup that you try to make to win the game, and a lot of times you just end up not winning the game as a result because it took you too long to ramp up on the deck.
Another big change over the last year is that people have, at long last, I believe, started playing some more removal. We're seeing an uptick in straight up removal spells. People have finally started playing like the free Commander Matters Black spell. That name always escapes me. Ryan.
Deadly Rollick.
It's Deadly Rollick. Thank you, Ryan. People have finally started playing Deadly Rollick, not so scared of hitting it off their Adnaz anymore. Turns out free is good. People are playing more and more bounce spells like Alchemist Retrieval, or, obviously people have always played Snap, but there's just more and more removal sneaking into lists. And it's not like a huge change, where in the past maybe you would have 1 or 2 removal spells. Maybe now people are packing 3 or 4, but that's still a 50 to 200% change compared to what it used to be, right? That can make a big change over the course of a year. And so I think something you'll notice is that on our list this time, we are a little bit less commander centric than we were on the last list, or maybe even a little more, maybe a little bit creature less centric, because people are playing more removal. It's a little bit harder to play creatures in these streets. Granted, we're not talking about a ton of removal, but there is some more.
Yeah. And the reason that I think removal had an uptick was simply the fact that some of the creatures people started packing were just ones that really packed a wallop, for lack of a better word.
Malcolm decks started winning, and people said, Malcolm and Winota decks started winning, and people said, I have to think about creatures.
Oh, what do you mean this one song doesn't work in my hand? Oh, what do you mean I lost the game? Be like, yeah. That was actually a viable thing for a long time. They're like, people don't pack counters for creatures. It's all like spell based, and so someone will sit there with 3 counter spells in their hand, and they'll be like, I can't hit your Glinthorn on the stack, we're dead right now. And so some of these creatures were starting to become so pivotal, and we saw the how saturated it became with these incidental value / hate bears that would hose a strategy like Opposition Agent and Drannith Magistrate. These cards have been around for years, but over the last 12, rolling 12-ish months, we've really seen them surge in popularity. And it's because they're like, oh, that one card yeah, I'm on this, yeah, I'm on that, but that one card just destroys a deck and they are dead in the water. And so as a counterweight to that, or to counteract that kind of insurgency of all these creatures, we're now seeing a lot more removal in our format, which is a good thing in my opinion.
Exactly, yeah. But despite all of this more removal that we have, commander-centric combos are still very high. A lot of the creatures, a lot of the commanders that you'll see people play kind of fall into two groups, I think. There's kind of this is a combo piece, and this is how I'm a part of how I'm going to win the game, or kind of a generic value piece. We kind of have a little of both of those on the list today because they're both very valid ways to think about what your commander should be doing for you. However, if your commander is not a value piece, like for example, Tymna, though there's no Tymna decks on the list today, or isn't like explicitly winning you the game on its own, pretty much, like Tivit, which is on our list later, spoilers, maybe reconsider why they're in your command zone. But that's a topic for a different day.
Yeah, basically that. I mean, what it comes down to is, I think my personal opinion is commander-centric combos are a little bit easier to grok, especially for commander players coming into the competitive scene or the competitive EDH side of things. And, casual usually defines its decks by their commanders, and they want to cast their commanders and do things with their commanders, or their commanders are a key part of something. And going up to the competitive thing, you're like, well, your commanders don't really matter. You're trying to dig into your deck and you're going to use these draw spells or these draw commanders or whatever. And that's a little bit harder for people to latch onto, whereas you say something like, oh yeah, you cast this commander, you win the game with it, this is what you do. And so that gets people a little bit more interested, plus it's just easier to understand when going from one side to the other.
Exactly. And for the decks we're going to talk about today, we do have a little bit of criteria. We have put a little bit of thought in this. I know it's kind of hard to imagine Ryan and I putting explicit thought into anything that we say on this podcast. But we did sit down and we did kind of think about what are these criteria that we want the decks we're going to recommend to hit. And number one, even though you might not be able to tell it today because we have a lot to say about all of these decks, we think it's important that it's easy to describe a deck's plan. Ryan, why is that?
So basically, if you are somewhere like at a local game store, or you have a friend that says, hey, and they're in your DMs on Discord or on Twitter or whatever it is, hey, I want to get into cEDH, what do you recommend? You don't want to have to tell them a 2-paragraph substance about how this wins or how it interacts with that, or this super intricate layered whatever it might be, because they're gonna be like, wow, that sounds awful, I don't want to do that. It just sounds really complicated. And you want to be able to easily latch on and just basically hand somebody a deck and say, this is this card, this is this deck.
Cast this card. Yeah. You want to do this.
You want to generate infinite mana with these 2 cards and then win the game. Mm-hmm. And that's how you play the deck. And you could say that in one sentence. But if you say something that's like super intricate or super like I'll give the Elsha example, and I'm only picking on Elsha because
it's a deeply complicated deck.
It's a very complicated deck. It's a really cool and fun deck. I'm not saying Elsha's bad. Elsha's awesome, but it's just not for new players. That's really what it is. And if you are a new player on Elsha and you fell in love with the format that way, I'm not picking on you either. That's super cool. I think that's awesome. I just know that if I describe Elsha to somebody, a lot of people are going to be like, that doesn't sound fun. Or maybe that sounds fun, but they'll lose a lot of games and then just get discouraged. Mm-hmm. So we want to make the deck easy to describe to people because they're already trying to process enough getting into an established meta and a very complicated format. I do believe that cEDH is the most complicated way to play Magic. Yeah, like the most, and so.
Yeah, and directly in that vein, we didn't want our decks to demand a deep understanding of obscure rules interactions. We put this on the list so we wouldn't have to talk about Gitrog today.
That's right. And there's also certain decks that kind of do that kind of thing. Okay, well, if you have a silence effect and then you have necropotence and then you can do this with this rules interaction, you could do that and that's on the stack and you're going to crack your emergent zone in order to get this going. It's like... Yeah. that's also a little bit much for a newer player. You know, the enfranchised players love it, but newer players,
But at the end of the day, if your deck, in order to win, you have to know how you subdivide the end step and what you can do in each parts of the end step, such as Get Rog. Or perhaps it's not 2018 anymore, but some of the Shimmer Zur lists or something like that.
Yep.
Not the greatest for new players.
Yep. So the next one is it doesn't demand too much mental energy. This piggybacks a little bit on rules, but it doesn't demand too much mental energy. Basically, cEDH does enough of that on its own. You're requiring, you have 3 opponents that are all trying to do very, very busted things, and you're trying to do a busted thing. And that's enough as it is. We want to bring you a deck that, you have fun with. So when we say it doesn't demand too much mental energy, we're talking about things like super diverging or branching lines, or alternate, patterns of play, or like 10,000 pivot points, depending upon a board state, the texture of the game, your seat position, cards in hand versus cards in graveyard. We don't want that. Example of that would be Hulk lines, Protean Hulk. If it's in your hand or that's in your graveyard, what's the different line? A new player doesn't need to. It's not. I wouldn't say it was a good idea to give somebody with a really big Hulk line to try and grok all that before they play their first game.
Yep. I definitely agree. And kind of our second to last criteria here was that we kind of want to make sure that these decks also can teach you something greater about cEDH. Like, even if you only played this deck, one of the decks that we recommend for a couple games, if you're newer to cEDH, you'll have learned something. Like, maybe it'll have taught you some about the importance of combat in cEDH, or you got to interact with some of the A+B combos and the best ways to assemble them, or Najeela is on our list once again. Spoilers later, but I think a great lesson you can learn from Najeela is how to assemble proper mana in a timely fashion and that kind of stuff. Najeela is great at teaching you how to actually get all 5 colors of mana into play at once, which usually isn't something that you have to worry about in a lot of EDH decks or other contexts in Magic the Gathering. But we want these decks to be able to teach you a little bit something greater about cEDH as a format beyond just specifics for that deck itself.
Yeah. And that's actually really hard to do. That's really hard to select a deck that is okay, I want to teach you about cEDH, not just teach you about this commander. That's actually kind of complicated. So we selected a couple of decks, and we'll have our justifications for some of these, even if at the surface you might think that doesn't make sense. So we'll get into it a little bit more.
And our most important criteria, obviously, here right at the bottom in bold, we wanted to select decks that will still give you a solid shot of winning the game. Yes. I think that's been some problems in these kind of lists in the past. Even an article that I wrote not that long ago, I looked back on it and I was like, these lists are easy and cool, but can they win the game if you're playing against Blue Farm or something? And the answer might just be no. So, or not often. So we wanted to choose lists that would just give you a great fighting chance every time.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and dive into our list. But the first thing that we want to tell you, after all the rules and all the meta and stuff like that, is this is just a recommendation. This isn't a requirement. What we want to tell you is play what you find to be fun. Okay, so that supersedes everything else that we recommend today. If you find that you heard us talk about Elsha or Gitrog or something like that, and they're like, "Wow, that actually sounds really interesting," then go play that.
Yeah, go play it. Yeah,
go play it.
Please.
Yeah, we're not saying these are our recommendations for new players, but if that is what scratches your itch and you really want to find out about that, go do that. This is about fun at the end of the day. We're just trying to help people who might, have a couple of stumbling blocks that might get them off of the format before they try it. A good recommendation, or this might be a recommendation that you would pass on to your friends or your LGS and say, hey, these might be pretty good for new players and whatnot. But so that is the first thing. You play what you find interesting first. Having that said, let's go ahead and dive into the commanders we recommend. And what we're going to do is we're going to start with the new commanders kind of in the last rolling 12. I know a little bit's on the margins and stuff because it's May, but these are the ones that we would, be the new ones that we've seen over the last 12. So we're going to have Cal kick us off. What's the first one?
First up on our list is Rocco, Cabaretti Caterer. This is a Naya creature, cost X, and then you get to go get a creature spell that costs X or less from your library and put it onto the battlefield. Rocco is about as flexible as a commander can get because you just get to spend as much mana as you want on it, and then you just go and get any creature you want out of your deck. What this actually represents, though, is just a win con in the command zone. Like 95% of the time that you're casting Rocco, you're threatening or attempting to win the game. Granted, a lot of the Rocco decks also still kind of require you to have like another creature in play at the time, like a sacrifice outlet or something like that. So you can sacrifice your Arena Rector that you're going and getting and yada, yada, yada. But the game plan of this deck is simple and it's powerful. You're going to make a ton of mana and you're going to look at your opponents in the face and you're going to say, all right, can you counter my Rocco? Because if you can't counter my Rocco, I'm going to win the game on top of whatever you try to do to me. So it's kind of almost like a new Godo almost, or like a more flexible Godo, or a less interactable with Godo in a lot of ways. Because you're just trying to build up to that 9, 10, 11 mana, and then, okay, I'm going to try to win the game. What can you do about it? Which I think is a great place to start in cEDH. Yep.
What I love about Rocco is kind of what I used to recommend about Godo a lot. Godo was cast commander, win game. And Rocco is cast commander, win game. And like you said, there's a little more nuance to it, but not too much nuance to actually grok. Like that actually says, oh, this is going to take you a long time to learn. It's not. It's cast Rocco, win game. Cast Rocco, cast maybe one other spell or do maybe one other thing.
Win game.
Yeah, win game. That's really what it is. The lines are not complicated. They're not hard to learn. They take about 2 minutes to learn. And Rocco can grow with you, and it could also adapt to whatever playstyle you want. Oh, I really like turbo, and I like to go super fast. I like to be the threat. Rocco can do that. Oh, I really like toolboxy strategies, and I like to pivot my plan depending on the layer of the game as you get more experience. Rocco can do that.
Turns out a creature tutor in the command zone, really good for flexibility.
Yep. And also, the third one is like, oh, I want to play stacks. Rocco can do that too. And another thing about Rocco that I think is really great is, like I said, it grows with you as a player because you can get a lot more intricate with your lines and stuff like that. Rocco is any creature is technically in the command zone as long as it's in Naya colors. So that means that there is so much unexplored space with Rocco that Rocco is far from solved. So there will be new things that come out all the time with Rocco that will turn Rocco on its head and it's suddenly a new deck to kind of play. So you can change cards in it to try and find a new strategy. That's a really fun thing about Rocco. And like we said, it's not complicated. And so we think Rocco is a really good one if you're trying to do that cast commander win game kind of strategy.
Yep, exactly. And speaking of cast commander win the game, next up on our list is Tivit, Seller of Secrets. Tivit, you don't win the game when you immediately cast Tivit, but if you casting Tivit and he resolves, you're like probably winning the game. But what is Tivit? He is a 6/6, 4/6, 3 and Esper mana, flying and ward 3. He has ward 3 for some reason. So if he resolves, he's never being removed. And then he has Council's Dilemma. Whenever Tivit enters the battlefield or deals combat damage to a player starting with you, each player votes for evidence or bribery. For each evidence vote, investigate. For each bribery vote, create a treasure token. And then when voting, you may vote an additional time. So, like I said, when Tivit resolves, you don't like explicitly win the game, but you create such a massive pile of value in clues and treasure tokens attached to a flying 6/6. You're going to start winning the game one way or the other really fast. And of course, Tivit also has the distinct advantage of being one half of an A plus B combo, giving you a great achievable goal to go towards. Notably, whenever Tivit enters the battlefield or deals combat damage, he gives you 5 artifact tokens. This goes excellently with the card Time Sieve, which is an artifact that says, tap, sacrifice 5 artifacts, take an extra turn after this one. So what you can do is hit somebody with Tivit, make those 5 treasures, take another turn, hit another player with Tivit, make 5 treasures, take an extra turn, and so on and so forth. And you can very easily kill all of your opponents through this not infinite turns loop, but basically as many turns as you need loop to close out the game. And on top of that, it's in Esper colors, which gives you a lot of tools that kind of make the game like easy for you to figure out. It gives you your tutors to go and give your stuff. It gives you counter spells to help protect your stuff. It gives you white cards too. So Tivit really has everything you could ever need, all in a kind of a easy to understand package that can really do like the grind plan well. If you're really into mid-range grindy fests, Tivit might be a great place to start for you.
And the best thing about Tivit, in my opinion, is that we're not handing you some B tier super simple deck. Like you said, one of our criteria was, hey, can this actually win you the game? Tivit puts up tournament results.
Yeah, Tivit has been easily like the biggest breakout tournament star of like the last 6 months.
Yeah. So Tivit not only is a fun deck to play and is just incredibly resilient, but it also can win tournaments. That's how good it is. And it's still easy to understand. So new players are picking it up all the time and still putting in numbers at their local play group as well as tournament results. And so that's really cool about Tivit. I hate Ward 3. They should have never put Ward 3 on that stupid card. What were they thinking?
I have been in several cEDH games at this point in time where I'm like, all right, I guess I'm just going to like try to bounce the Tivit before they get to your turn with my snap. And they're like, do you have 5 mana? I'm like, no, I forgot to read the card. I forgot that was on there.
my Swords to Plowshares cost 4. I guess Tivit resolves. Okay. I'm not even at that point in the game.
You got me.
Yeah. It's so disgusting that it has Ward 3. And I think that's what really honestly sends it over the top. That's what makes it competitively viable, because it is a big mana investment to get your commander onto the battlefield. It really is. And so having, 2 of it paid back immediately if you vote treasures, if not more. And just the fact that it's combo, card advantage, and mana advantage all in the command zone.
Yep.
That's really good.
Kind of does it all. And like you said, since it's so hard to remove, and since it's it's part of a commander centric combo, it kind of also like hits 2 of our trends from the last year too, right? You can sidestep the additional removal that people are playing. You're in all the right colors to be like as proactive as possible, and it's a commander centric combo, which just kind of makes your life easy.
Yep. Yeah, so it really checks so many of the boxes. If I was to only recommend one commander throughout this entire thing, it would be Tivit. I mean, Tivit is kind of my personal number 1 on this list. It's so
I would definitely agree with you. Definitely the one downside here, like you mentioned, like 6 mana is a lot. However, we have Jeweled Lotus, we have Mana Crypt, we have Soul Ring, 3 of the 6 is colorless, which does make your life a little bit easier. It's not like he costs white, white, blue, blue, black, black, right? He's no Niv Mizzet out here. Red, 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 blue, 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 right? So yeah, it's a bit of a big ask to get Tivit out onto the battlefield, and you may run into a couple of games where you just like lose the game before you even get to sniff casting Tivit, because again, 6 mana is a lot. And you might just not have the run of 3 counter spells you need to counter that ad nauseum and stop that Glinthorn Buccaneer and, silence the Hulk player in their upkeep or whatever. You might just not have those crazy runs sometimes. But if there's any downfall of this deck, it is that. But I think in that way, Tivit also kind of helps you rely on your commander a little bit less than a lot of all of these other decks do. Obviously, Rocco, you're not really like relying on your commander, right? Because you're trying to wait to cast it to win the game. But a lot of the other commanders coming up on this list, it's just like they're kind of the deck. Like they're kind of the reason you're playing the deck is those commanders. Whereas Tivit, having an A+B combo is really strong. Getting so many treasure tokens and all of those clue tokens, surprisingly enough, really helps you get through the end of the game. Like getting to winning by generating all that value is shockingly great. But since he costs 6, you'll be aiming to cast him, but you don't have to rush to cast him on turn 1 like you do with so many of these other decks.
Yep. Tivit can grind better. Another thing I like about Tivit is that Tivit scales with you as a player. I'm a big fan of decks that grow with you in your journey in cEDH. Rocco does that, and Tivit does that. You can get a lot more nuance with Tivit with things like that Council's Dilemma, where you're like, are you going to give me clues? Are you going to give me treasures? Or, when to burn those things, when to, find mana advantage. And, it's really great. I love that about Tivit. It does grow with you as a player, too.
Exactly. Speaking of a card that doesn't grow with you as you get better at the game, we're going to move on to our next commander. But first, we're going to take a quick ad break, and then we'll be right back.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Card Conduit. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value of my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have 3 main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best buy list price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would have from a major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list price against the specific condition of a card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the show notes or the description, or use the promo code POWER, you'll also get 10% off their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's podcast.
And welcome back. We're still here talking about our best decks for new players in cEDH for 2023. A long title. Next up, not a long title, is a card that has come into popularity more and more recently. I guess it's mainly popular recently because it's pretty much still a brand new card. That is Slicer, Hired Muscle. His other side, Slicer, High Speed Antagonist, the side that people usually cast. Slicer is a double-sided transformer. You can cast them for 3 to create Slicer, High Speed Antagonist. That is a vehicle that's also a creature. It's a 3/2. It has first strike and haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, convert it at the end of combat. And then it flips into Slicer, Hired Muscle, a 3/4 with double strike and haste. And at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you may have that player gain control of Slicer until end of turn. If you do, untap Slicer, goad it, meaning it has to attack somebody that is not its owner, which is you if you're playing the deck, and it can't be sacrificed this turn. If you don't, convert it. So what the Slicer deck does, it does require one little tiny piece of rules knowledge, which is that even though you are not controlling your own Slicer, it is still a commander. Commanderness is like an innate attribute that every commander has that cannot be removed through like pretty much any means. So no matter what happens to your Slicer, even if it gets like turned into a forest, it is still a commander. And what this means is that Slicer is really good at killing people with combat damage. Slicer is really good at killing people with commander damage. Every single turn, he can dish out like a minimum of 6 commander damage to one of your opponents, and he can't attack you. So in a turn cycle, Slicer can just kill somebody. If you attack an opponent and then you pass the card to an opponent and then they attack the same person you did, and then the third opponent attacks the same person that you did, and you like come back around to you and you attack that person too, that person's just dead. They have lost the game. They're out of the game in just a turn cycle, and it's on a weird little creature that they probably weren't packing creature removal for. A lot of Slicer decks also play equipment, so like if you just even give a Slicer +1/+1, cool, somebody can die before it even comes back around to you. That's just crazy. That's just kind of awesome. We are kind of a little bit reticent to recommend this deck because it is definitely one of the more strange ones on this list. It can create really weird games in comparison to a lot of other cards, which a lot of people are into, which is why the deck is popular. It can take the game a little bit out of your hands because you have to convince your opponents to attack the same people so you can take people out of the game. Or maybe you want to spread damage around so you can end the game yourself quickly whenever it matters. And it's interesting in that it's like a lot of people play like a mono red stacks deck. A lot of the ways that Slicer actually lives through the game is because they follow up their Slicer with a Trinisphere or a Thorn of Amethyst or whatever to really help slow down the game. And it's a lot of interesting lessons to be learned in playing Slicer. You know, it'll teach you about the importance of combat real quick, that's for sure. But Ryan, you were actually the person who wrote down Slicer (Psi) on this on this list. So why do you recommend Slicer to new cEDH players?
Two things. First of all, I hate Slicer. I hate it. I don't like Slicer. I don't like playing against Slicer. I don't like playing Slicer. But there is something that I cannot ignore about Slicer. I have never seen more casual players online and in person say that Transformers a cEDH deck. Oh, that sounds so fun. I'm going to build it.
Yep.
I haven't seen a single deck create that much buzz around cEDH ever. Not in the last 12 months, not in the last since this decade started, ever. Slicer is fun. It's fun to turn cEDH on its head. It's fun to, mess with your players. It's fun to disrupt plans because there are players out there who like to do that kind of thing. I want to throw a wrench in the system and see what happens to the engine. And Slicer does that. And I don't want to win with Thassa's Oracle. I don't want to win with some dumb AB combo. Slicer doesn't win that way. Slicer hits you with its stupid robot. And that's what you do. And people love it. They love this deck. They love this card. I know non-cEDH players that built Slicer as a cEDH deck and they didn't play cEDH before. They're like, this sounds so fun. And they get in there and they'll steal a couple of games here and there because of it. It's not going to win you every single game, but that wasn't our criteria to win every single game. And it gets people into cEDH, and it is fun for those new players. It's reminiscent of the casual table. It's a really good transition point. And I guess I'm just repeating myself. It's just so much fun for those new players to play. They're like, wow, this is cEDH. This is still really fun. Be like, well, first of all, it was always fun, but I get it. I get it. But like,
no, it's a cool card. It's a cool, unique deck. It's probably one of like the most unique cEDH decks we've seen in a minute. It does flip the game entirely on its head. You're not used to sitting under the pressure of, okay, if I don't have a blocker, and if I don't have a blocker, if I can't convince this person not to attack me, I will be out of the game before I untap. That's a pressure we feel sometimes when we know somebody has tutored for Thassa's Oracle. We're like, all right, I hope everybody has their counter spells because we're just going to get Thassa Oracle comboed. But it's a bit different when you're sitting there and everybody's like, yeah, I have no creature removal for this Splicer. So you're just like sitting there waiting for your inevitable end, desperately hoping that you rip a snap off the top of your library or something. It's an entirely different dynamic for cEDH games to have. And I do appreciate it for that.
Yeah. And some people will be like, well, this doesn't teach you about cEDH. Yes, it does, because it teaches you about politics. Mm-hmm. And politics is a huge part of cEDH. Mm-hmm. The players that win cEDH tournaments don't bring the best decks. They politic the best. And Slicer will teach you how to politic. And it will also show you how other people politic as well, which will help catapult you in your politic game. Because you can sit back, watch everybody deal with the unfired garbage can that gets passed around every turn cycle and figure out how to deal with it. And that is actually super important. That is super valuable. That is one of the things that a lot of cEDH players struggle with. Leveling up their game is actually not in how tight they play. It's actually a lot in their politics. Mm-hmm. But that's a whole other subject. We won't get into it. But Slicer does do a really good job of, throwing you in the deep end of the politics side of CEDH.
Mm-hmm. It'll really teach you to see through people's bowl, as one could say. There will be a lot of people sitting there staring you in the face saying, "You shouldn't attack me with Slicer. I can't do anything right now. I can't win," and then they'll untap and win. So just attack them. Take it from me, somebody who, at the last major tournament I played, talked myself out of dying to Slicer twice, and then simply won the game.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Slicer will not win every single game. Every single game will be interesting with Slicer in it. That's for sure.
Exactly. And now we're going to move to the second half of our list, which is a little bit different. These are commanders that last time Ryan and Ian recommended to you as decks that were great for new players. And they are still the ones from that list that we would still recommend today in 2023. First up on the list is Kinnan, Bond or Prodigy. Ryan, tell us about why Kinnan is still awesome.
Kinnan is there are a lot of different versions of Kinnan, which means that it can adapt to whatever playstyle you really like. But Kinnan also it has a cEDH version. They call it mid-power or big flips or whatever, that plays the big dumb creatures that just kill you. It plays the Nezahal Primal Tides. It plays the Hullbreaker Horrors. It plays the Jin-Gitaxises of the world. And it flips into those with Kinnan's activated ability. It ramps. It plays big dumb creatures, and it wins you the game with them. And that's really cool. And there's a whole episode on it. We'll link it in the show notes and whatnot, where we talked a lot about Kinnan and why it was really, really cool. Kinnan also grows with you as a player. Now, you can just flip into big dumb creatures and win, but there's a lot of nuance to Kinnan too, that you don't have to know to play Kinnan, but you will really benefit from starting to learn as you go through the deck. Kinnan is a really cool deck, very strong deck, can really do a lot of things, can put down really good numbers, and can adapt to whatever play style you want. Kinnan is a great deck, and it gets casual people over into competitive. So if you're a casual player, hey, did you want to play Nezahal and cEDH? Because Kinnan could do that.
Come on down to really Big Flip Street.
Yeah, it's really, really fun. So that's why I recommend Kinnan for this particular one.
Yeah, Kinnan is kind of almost another commander that's almost like a little bit especially the Big Flips version. It's kind of almost in the vein of like cast your commander, win the game, except your commander costs a green and a blue. It costs 2 mana.
Yep.
And then he amps up all of your mana so powerfully you can very quickly activate him. And in the Big Flips version, every single creature you can cheat into play is pretty much so impactful that you should be able to like win the game from that point. So if you can do the hard task of casting a 2 CMC commander, having like 1 or 2 dorks in play, maybe an artifact, and you can activate Kinnan and you're off to the races. It's a very easy game plan to understand. It's only 2 colors, so you don't really have to think about what mana am I going to go get? What mana do I need? And all that kind of stuff. And he's cheap. It's great. Everything about Kinnan is awesome. We've said a lot about Kinnan in the past on this podcast, and we'll say it again. Play Kinnan. Deck's great. Deck is easy to learn. You just activate Kinnan, see what happens. It's a blast.
Great deck. All right, the next one that we have on the list is Yuriko the Tiger Shadow. Yuriko is that ninja commander that is really hard to build badly. It's really hard to build weak. You throw ninjas in there and you just win games. The thing that we like about Yuriko the Tiger Shadow is the fact that it scales well to higher powered tables by doing the exact same thing that it does throughout all scales. You want to attack with ninjas, flip into really big spells, and kill your opponents by having them drain their lives. You do that at the low power tables, the mid power tables, and the high power and cEDH tables. It does the same thing. It just does them to varying degrees of power level. This is one of those things that I think people cite examples of, well, you have a mana crypt in your deck is cEDH. Because really what it takes to make Yuriko a cEDH deck is to pump all of the really, really powerful things into it and then learn to control the game a little bit more. And that's how Yuriko can win the game. How you're playing Yuriko in casual is how you play Yuriko in cEDH. And so if you know Yuriko at the casual tables, you could easily just go and take Yuriko, power it up, and then play it and contend at the cEDH table as well.
Yep, exactly. There's not a whole lot to say about Yuriko. It's just good. It's simple. It's easy. Attack with all your ninjas, incidentally draw a lot of cards, drain your opponents. Like, if there's any difference in between a lot of casual Yuriko decks and the cEDH decks, it's that Yuriko happens to have like Thassa's Oracle combo in it, where casual decks might not, you know? You're drawing a lot of cards, so sometimes you can just be like, oops, I have the Oracle combo, I'm going to win the game. You play Yuriko, it's awesome. That's just, these ones are easy. These decks... These decks are just easy to recommend to people. Again, it's a 2-color commander.
Yep.
Your mana's not going to be an issue. The game plan is right there in front of you. Play ninjas, cheat Yuriko into play, cheat other ninjas into play. I mean, if you look at a Yuriko deck list, it's a lot of like unblockable 1/1s and then a lot of cool ninjas.
Yep.
This deck also was majorly changed. Not a year ago, but over a year ago now. With the release of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, Yuriko got a big injection of ninjas that did. The cEDH deck used to be kind of a lot more, kind of almost like a Demir tempo deck where you'd have to get cute with your stuff. And yeah, you'd have some ninja triggers, but Yuriko was kind of there to like draw you some cards, where now it can kind of just be like a true ninja deck. You have enough good ninjas, you can just spend all your time cheating them in to draw a lot of cards off Yuriko. It's awesome. It has seen a big change since we last talked about it, but for the better.
It has. It has seen a change. The last time we talked about it was before Neon Dynasty. And so it has gotten kind of this, like you said, this injection or this resurgence of really good, actual, viable ninjas. And it's a really cool deck. And it still plays the same. It just, has better tools to play that game.
And the final thing on our list here today is one that I know a lot of people hold, or a lot of people think is like a weird deck to recommend to newer players, because of all the decks on this list, it's probably like the most complicated.
On this list,
yes,
on this list, it's the most complicated.
On this list, it's the most complicated. On this list, it's like the most, I would say, often unfocused cEDH deck, and it is also the only one that is above 3 colors. We have 2 3 colors, we have a single color, we have 2 colors, and then we have Najeela the Blade Blossom, the 5 CMC, not 5 CMC, 5 color, 3 mana value menace. Najeela is a fascinating Magic card and a fascinating deck. Obviously, she herself is very strong. She herself is just an outlet pretty much entirely on her own. She A+B combos to win the game with 4 cards now, maybe even 5 cards. She it's just like she just wins the game. But she's a 5-color deck. So in addition to, the Najeela plan, you can also play all the other plans. Mm-hmm. You can just put all of the good cards into your deck and incidentally win the game. Like, the one downside that Najeela has over the other, 4 and 5 color commanders is that she's like missing the card advantage, right? Your Timna Crom draws you a lot of cards. Your Kenrith can draw you some cards if you need them, right? She draws less cards than a lot of the other commanders on this list too. Yuriko draws you cards, Tivit draws you cards, Kinnan kind of draws you cards. Najeela just makes warriors, but she goes onto the battlefield quickly. She gives you options to play all these other things. So I think Najeela is kind of a great deck to start with if you're already like pretty familiar with Magic. And you want to learn some of the more complicated things that cEDH has to offer, or can like see some of the most powerful things that cEDH has to offer. Because Najeela is kind of just like 5-color soup. You are going to be playing all of the best cards. When you look at a hand from Najeela, you're just like, oh, there's Rhystic Study and Mana Crypt and the best counterspell in the game, and insert random other really powerful spell. And then you have to figure out, all right, how am I going to transition this into actually winning the game? Obviously, there's a lot of really powerful spells here, but there are 4 different colors, and I only have 2 lands in here and a colorless mana rock, and my commander is red, so there's the 5th color that I have to figure out here. So how am I going to sequence this? How am I going to do this? How am I going to put my mana together? When do I need to go shields up versus developing my board? How do I figure this out? Like, if you want it all in one-stop shop to learning just about everything you can about cEDH, I think Najeela is the answer for that, but it can be a lot for like somebody who's truly new to cEDH. Like, Najeela is the new to cEDH deck that I would give to somebody who's been playing competitive Magic for the last 5 years, right? I wouldn't recommend Najeela if you're coming from like a casual EDH background and that's been your entire experience with Magic. I would not recommend Najeela to you. But for people who are more seasoned in a wider variety of Magic the Gathering, I'm handing you Najeela every time and saying, hey, try this out.
Mm-hmm. So this one is an interesting include because there's a number of different things that I think that are very new player friendly. Not new to Magic friendly, but new player friendly to cEDH. Number one, Najeela is just disgustingly easy to cast. One Jeweled Lotus, she's on the battlefield. One Mana Crypt and a land drop, she's on the battlefield. It's so easy. She's cheap, so she's easy to recast. So if you are doubling down on the Najeela wins the game plan, then that's going to be super easy because she's a little bit more resilient than that. She wins the game. She is not an A plus B combo. She is a standalone combo on her own. I always forget the math, but I think it's like 6 combats and the game is over. 6 unimpeded combats, and she wins by herself with her compounding warriors. She doesn't even need a B. It's easier with a B combo, the B part of a combo, but she actually just wins by herself. And that's a crazy thought. And there are so many things that she combos with. You can just stumble into an infinite combo. It's so easy to get with her. And another thing is that Najeela is definitely combat-centric with her combos. Now, going to what you said, Cal, where you said, well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this to the newest of new players, depending upon what it was. If you have a very, very seasoned commander player that knows the ins and outs of the different power levels, and they know combat really well because they play a lot of commander, Najeela I would probably push towards. Because the thing is that Najeela's gotten to the point where there's just no bad cards in her. That's what they call her. They call her NBC Najeela. No bad cards Najeela. Meaning that you're right. Every single card in there is just a really good card. Not some weird layered combo, intricate B tier, something that might go layer with this. No, it's just every card's a banger. Every card you draw is not dead. And that's really good because you're going to figure out what all these good cards are. Now, navigating certain tables and stuff like that is a nuance that every cEDH player is going to have to learn. But she wins with combat. She's an A plus B combo, and she basically plays all the good cards in the format. She is one of the best commanders out there, and that's part of the reason. She also scales with you as a commander. You start off, you just try and assemble the combo and win. But then later on, you're like, oh, this is a point where I don't have to use this, Najeela warrior attacking combo thing, and I can maybe do something else. So you're ripping Adnaz off, and you do the Adnaz thing, and because it just runs Thoracle Consult. Because it's just 2 cards. They're just really good together. So Najeela is really, really good, and it does scale with you. Now, I do also agree that, this is probably one of the decks that is probably better suited for everyone who's maybe more experienced with 1v1 Magic that wants to get into cEDH, and they're not jumping directly from Commander to cEDH. If you have a Commander player that played Najeela, obviously give Najeela a shot. Yep. But if you have a 1v1 player, give them Najeela. Yep. They will grok really easily because they know things about combat. They know things about interactions. They know things about combos, and they're going to pick up Najeela and love Najeela. So if you have a 1v1 grinder that gets out there and wants to start playing cEDH, give them Najeela.
Yep. And that concludes our list, everybody. We hope that you found this to be useful. We hope that maybe you learn a little bit of something. Maybe you're looking for a new cEDH deck and you found it today. Maybe you're trying to find decks to help other people learn the game. No matter what, we hope that this helped you or others get into cEDH or is deepening your dive into this awesome way to play Magic the Gathering. More invested players, which deck did you start on playing cEDH? Do you think it hurt or helped you on your adventure? What deck would you recommend to somebody new to the format and why? Let us know. Tell us in the comments. Hit us up on Twitter. We're both there. We're pretty easy to find. We would love to hear your opinions. In that vein, make sure to give us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast aggregator. You'd be surprised how much it helps other people find us. You can also find us and Playing with Power on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and more. All links are in the episode notes. That about wraps it up for this episode of the podcast. Tune in next time when we talk more about our favorite format in our favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and we will see you next time.